Hi, my name is Andrea. I'm an educator at the National Gallery of Canada in Ottawa. I'm happy you're here with me to look at one of the gallery's most famous paintings. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that the National Gallery is located on the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe. This virtual world connects us across boundaries and time, but I'm grateful to our Indigenous peoples as traditional stewards of the land and the enduring relationship that exists between Indigenous peoples and their traditional territories. Today we're going to take some time to look carefully and to talk about one painting. I'm going to ask you some questions to think about or talk about if you like. You can pause the video if you need some time to write or to chat about my questions with whoever you're watching with. You might want a pencil and some paper to write or sketch your ideas, so get yourself organized, get comfy, and let's go look at this painting together. Let's take a few seconds to look quietly at this picture. Where do your eyes go first? What do you like about the picture? Is there anything you dislike about the picture? I'm going to ask you to pause the video in a moment. I'd like you to write down a question you have while you look at this painting. If this picture could talk, what would you ask it? Pause now and write down what you'd like to know about this painting. Great. For now, just put your question to the side. We'll come back to it later. Right now, I'm going to describe what we can see in this painting, just so we're all on the same page. This is a pretty big painting, but not huge. If you stretch your arms out to the side, this painting is about as tall as that and not quite that wide. It's painted with oil paint on canvas. First off, we notice that it is very dark, with a bright light coming in from the right side, highlighting the middle figure. We can see two figures. The woman who is lit up is seated, wearing a heavy-looking and richly decorated gown. We can see her left slippered foot poking out from under the dress, and her right hand is on her lap. Her left arm is relaxing on a piece of furniture. Her eyes look down slightly, and her long, red blonde hair is pinned away from her pale face and flowing down her back. This woman takes up all of the middle of the painting. The other figure is in shadow and stands behind the spotlit woman. She seems to be attending to the seated woman, perhaps combing her long hair. We can only see the top half of the standing woman's body, wearing a dark green-blue cloak with a hood. Her face is in shadow, and her eyes look down toward the work of her right hand. The space that the two figures are seated in is dark and made of stone, almost like a cave. On the left, behind the women, hidden in shadow, is a large curtain that is propped open. Also, a cover table is cluttered with different items, including necklaces, an open book, and a metal object that looks like a trophy, but is more likely a large goblet or cup. Now that I have described the picture, what do you think is going on? Pause this video if you want to talk about it with your friends. I'll be right here when you get back. What do you think is going on in this picture? So, do you have a theory as to what's going on here? If so, hang on to it, because I want to share with you what I know about this painting. We're going to look at the clues to see if we can figure out the story the painter is telling us. And let me tell you, we have our work cut out for us in this mysterious painting. So let's start by naming some of the clues. The story in this painting is about the woman in the center. Agreed? She's brightly lit and takes up most of the space. It's probably not a story from our lifetime. It's pretty rare to see someone wearing these sorts of clothes today, unless they're getting dressed up for a very special outing. And I'm guessing that she's either quite well off or is from a wealthy family. There are a few clues that communicate that. We already mentioned her magnificent clothes, but there is also the jewelry and the gems she's wearing, around her neck, in her hair, her wrists, and in her ear, the one we can see. Not to mention the extra jewels on the table behind her. And of course, she has someone attending to her. These are all clues to the wealthy status of this woman. Now, let me tell you something interesting about the artist that is going to help us better understand the story here. Rembrandt van Rijn, or simply Rembrandt, is the Dutch artist who painted this almost 400 years ago. Rembrandt loved to create pictures that left the interpretation up to us. And this picture is a wonderful example of that. First off, this painting was made at an important time in Rembrandt's life. He paints this picture when he's around 25 years old. At this time, he was leaving his childhood home of Leiden in the Netherlands to move to Amsterdam, where he'd make his career. Now, Leiden is only about 40 minutes away by car if you visit today, but 400 years ago, that was a pretty big move. But it's a move that Rembrandt had to make to become the artist he wanted to be. So his style of painting is shifting to suit the tastes of the new customers he's getting to know in Amsterdam. This painting was made around the time that he's making that move. Second, this painting is a kind of combination of styles for the artist. Let me explain that. It's part personal portrait and part historical painting. The personal portrait part is easy to explain. We think that the woman who modeled for this picture was Rembrandt's sister Elizabeth. The historical painting part is a little more complicated, and that's where things get fun. A historical painting is one where the artist has to create an image of stories from the past. For example, you might be familiar with paintings of stories from the Bible. In a historical painting, the artist includes clues that will be familiar to the people who look at them. But since neither the artist nor the viewer have actually witnessed the story, they have to invent what it looked like. It can be tricky to tell a story with pictures rather than words, and it takes a lot of imagination to pick the right clues to tell the story well. So artists who create historical paintings have always been admired. And some people will say that creating a historical painting is the ultimate accomplishment for an artist. And well, Rembrandt, he was a whiz. Notice how Rembrandt has given us a few clues, but not too many? If this picture was wider, or we could peer around the corner, we might be able to fill in a few more details of this story. And there's plenty of mystery to get us to wonder. For instance, this woman seems lost in thought. She's not upset, but not necessarily happy either. How do you think she feels? And what about the standing woman who seems lost in her thoughts as well? What is she thinking as she tends to the young woman's hair? It's impossible for us to know for sure, but we're not alone. Even art historians don't all agree on the same story, because there are just enough clues that it could be any number of stories. One thing everyone agrees upon is that the confusion around what this painting is all about began 300 years ago. The title of this picture has changed over time, from The Jewish Wife or The Jewish Bride to Woman at Her Toilet to what we call it today, Heroine from the Old Testament. So while Rembrandt might have used his sister to model for this portrait, it is quite likely a historical or biblical story he's portraying. But which story is this painting telling? Art historians believe that there are 5 possibilities. I'm going to share them all with you and let you decide. Contender number 1. This woman is Judith. Judith is a heroine from a few thousand years ago. She charms the general of the army invading her country, gets him drunk, and cuts off his head, saving her people. It's a pretty gruesome story, and one that was popular during Rembrandt's time. The clue that makes us wonder if this painting is telling Judith's story is that her maidservant helps her to carry out the plan. So the moment we are witnessing here could very well be the minutes before this violent act is about to happen. Contender number 2. This woman is Artemisia. Artemisia was a queen in the country we know today as Turkey. She is known for her extraordinary grief after her husband died and mixed his ashes into her daily drink during the 2 years she survived him. The clue that Rembrandt has portrayed Artemisia here is the silver drinking cup on the table in the background. Contender number 3. This woman is Bathsheba. You might have already heard the story of young David defeating the giant Goliath. But in this story, that same David shows a not so nice side of himself. He is a king and commands Bathsheba to betray her husband to be with him. If this woman is Bathsheba, Rembrandt is portraying her as she prepares to meet King David. Her expression invites us to understand how she must feel in this moment. Contender number 4. This woman is Esther. Esther is a Jewish queen who is preparing herself to convince her husband, the Persian king Ahasuerus, not to kill the Jews in his kingdom. Rembrandt's clue that it's Esther's story he's telling is the open book of papers on the table in the background. They could be the judgment ordering the murder. And finally, contender number 5. This woman is Ruth. In this story, both the husbands of Ruth and her mother-in-law, Naomi, have died. Naomi helps the younger Ruth prepare to meet Boaz, the man who will become her second husband. If this is the story that Rembrandt is depicting, our clue is in the loving way the older woman cares for and attends to her daughter-in-law. So there you have it. 5 biblical stories about 5 heroic women, all of whom would be familiar to Rembrandt and to the people buying his paintings. Whichever story Rembrandt has chosen to tell, he has characteristically shown us the lead up to the story and not the action. Which story do you think it is? Judith, Artemisia, Bathsheba, Esther, or Ruth? Or can you think of a different story? One of the things that I love about art, and this is a perfect example, is that there is no one right answer. We're living in a very different world today than Rembrandt's. Maybe this picture reminds you of a story you know. I suspect Rembrandt would be thrilled to know that his paintings still speak to people hundreds of years later. And what about this? Do you think it's possible that Rembrandt intentionally created a puzzling story so that we wonder about it and therefore spend more time with it? Earlier, I asked you to write down a question that you would ask this painting. Let's go back to that. Reread what you wrote. Did I answer your question, or did I add more questions for you to think about? If you enjoy this painting, you'll find lots of information about Rembrandt on the web or in books at the library. Finally, I'm going to leave you with a challenge. Do you remember how I described what a historical painting is? A story the artist has to imagine because it happened in the past. I challenge you to think of one of your own memories and make a picture of it. You'll have to think about the key moment that best illustrates your memory, the setting for it, and all the elements that make the story visual without using words. Let me give you an example to give you some ideas. I was about 5 years old when I met a famous hockey player. I don't actually remember meeting him, but my parents tell me the story. So I would think about the setting, outside an old Quebec farmhouse. The elements, there is me, my parents, and the hockey player. It's summertime, and I imagine that we're drinking lemonade together. In my head, the picture is also black and white, like an old photograph. So that's how I might start my historical painting. This is a really tough challenge. So maybe you want to begin by writing out your memory or telling it to a friend. By doing this, you'll have a better understanding of the process Rembrandt had to go through to create one image that represented an entire story. Or, in the case with this painting, multiple stories. And just for fun, what do you call an artist who gives off bad vibes? Sketchy. I hope you enjoyed this slow look at one of the gallery's most famous paintings. Now you can see that by spending some time with a picture, it really comes alive. Thanks for joining me today, and I hope I'll see you around the galleries at the National Gallery of Canada. Stay safe.